Huddle up, Steelers Nation. It's Tank for Steelers Chalk Talk. Jim, you've written another book, On the Clock. For you guys that don't understand what that means, on the clock as in the NFL draft, right, Jimmy?
That's right, NFL draft. It's the history.
Look, if you love your Pittsburgh Steelers, take the time, go to jimwexell.com. Get, well, not only this book, On the Clock by Jim, the Polamalu book, the other one I love, the road trip book where he's sitting in kitchens talking to people's parents, and just one of the best writers in Pittsburgh history, Jim Wexell. I'm serious, Jimmy. On the Clock. Get it for the holiday season. Get it whenever you're watching this video, and you'll be glad you did, because when you're sitting around the bar and you drop some information that they don't know about Bill Nunn and about Jack Lambert and about Rocky Blyer and about whoever else might be in this book, then guess what? You're going to be the smartest guy in the room, courtesy of Jim Wexell.
NFL draft. It's the history of the NFL draft now with the Steelers.
With just
so
the Steelers.
we go back to William Shakespeare. I mean, we're not
to be or not to be.
Exactly.
That guy?
Yeah. There's a story about him meeting Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway says, "Hi, I'm Ernest Hemingway," and he goes, "Hi, I'm William Shakespeare." And Hemingway thought he was jerking him around, punched him in the nose.
What position did Shakespeare play?
He was a let's see, back in the wing T, or whatever that offense was called. He was a tailback, which means he would pass every now and then, and he beat Notre Dame or Ohio State, I forget what team. It's in the book.
I love it. I love it.
He beat him in the game of the century with his throw, and the Steelers picked him first out of their magazine, and he never signed.
Oh, okay.
William Shakespeare. But their first great draft pick was Whizzer White.
Surely.
And so we go through that, and we go all the way up.
Look, I want you to think of something. And you guys and ladies that are Steelers fanatics, who you've got your tattoos, you've got your man caves, lady caves decked out in black and gold. I want you to think about something. This organization is one of the winningest ever in the NFL because of a couple of reasons. Great family. The Rooneys, Mr. Rooney told me, I asked him one time, why are you so successful year after year? Surround yourself with good people and good things happen, Dan Rooney said. The other key component, I mean, where do you get Superman, T.J. Watt? Where do you get Franco Harris? Who takes a chance on Rocky Blyer? This is what Jim has done on the clock. He's gone through the Steelers history books on the clock, gone through all the great drafts, and I'm going to let Jimmy talk about it now. What are some of the highlights of the book for you as the author and fan of the Steelers?
Oh, as a researcher, I think the highlight is my writing.
No, spoken like a true genius.
Seriously, I like the storytelling aspect. I don't want you to be worried that it's encyclopedic. Okay, it's thoroughly researched, but I got all the angles and put together stories and wrote stories about these people, the Hall of Famers, the players that led to the championship teams. Of course, the build up to the '70s is incredible, and we pretty much know a lot about the 2000 championship teams, with Polamalu and Rothlisberger and those guys. But I revisit a lot of that, and there's a lot of, how exactly Ben Roethlisberger was drafted, Troy Polamalu, all those guys.
What about the old guys, like, Ernie Stautner, one of my favorite Steelers of all time. When you talk about Steel City tough, Jim, Ernie Stautner is the first thing that comes to my mind.
Ernie Stautner was offered $7,000 by the Steelers to sign. I was a second-round draft pick out of Boston College. He tried to walk on at Notre Dame, and they said, no, you have to go somewhere else. You're too small and slow. And he went to Boston College and teamed up with Art Donovan, who was told the same thing by Notre Dame. So they went. They were a wrecking crew in the Boston College line. It was a pretty good team, and Ernie Stautner made All-American team, so therefore he made the sports magazines, which is what the Steelers scouting department was at the time.
Is that right?
Yeah. One time Jock Sutherland got mad at Pat Livingston, sent him out to go watch a college game. So he was the first paid scout.
I hope you didn't write, don't send me any stiffs.
That's the old Undertaker line. But
so how does it?
Ernie Stautner, just to get back to him, the second-round draft pick, the Steelers offered him $7,000. When they showed up to sign him, they only had $6,000. They tried to cheat him out of $1,000. So Ernie got furious and he asked if he could, shop his wares around, get traded. He wanted to be traded. Tried to go to the Giants. He went to the Giants. They told him, you're too small and slow. And they were his favorite team because he grew up in New York. And so he became immediately hateful of the Giants. And then they tried to trade him to the Rams with Tex Schramm for a guy from Penn State named Garbage Pail. His last name's in there. And they saw a picture, and the Rams didn't know why the Steelers wanted Garbage Pail. He was out of Penn State. He was a huge lineman. And then there was a picture of Garbage Pail and Ernie Stautner together, and it was Mutt and Jeff. And Tex Schramm, who was a young guy running the Rams then before he ran the Cowboys, said, no, we're not doing this, and turned down the trade. So Stautner had nowhere to go except just sign with the Steelers. And Garbage Pail got cut a couple weeks later, and Ernie Stautner became a Hall of Famer. There's a lot of good Ernie Stautner stuff in there. I'm glad you brought him up.
Oh, he's one of my
No one
favorite.
else brings him up.
Oh, I love Ernie.
And there's not enough information out there on Stautner.
Well, you probably had to do a lot of digging.
I was in the Hall of Fame basement, Pro Football Hall of Fame, great research facility. I wanted to go there for my Polamalu book, but they said, you have to make appointments, you have to be a member of the Pro Football Writers, and I am. So I got my appointments made, and I sat in that library. It's a researcher's dream.
Yeah.
And just all kind of new nuggets I dug up. It was really fun. So all these old guys the Steelers have, like Stautner, there's not much known about Stautner around here, but so hopefully that changes. Wizard White, Bill Dudley, but I'm not all stuck in that stuff. We progressed. And
well, that's what I want to ask you.
Yeah.
Jimmy and I chose, of course, the statue of the Chief behind us, one of the founders of the NFL, one of the innovators of the league. How does the Chief come into this to create scouting departments? Does any of that come out in the book?
Well, yeah.
I mean, sitting there with a cigar chewing and...
Well, if only he could find a sports magazine that was as good as the Daily Racing Form, he could have done something back then.
The ponies.
But, he would read Grantland Rice and take Wizard White was a Grantland Rice favorite, and Bill Dudley was a Grantland Rice. Some great stories written by Grantland Rice at the end of both of their careers, I believe, led to the Steelers drafting him because that's how they did it. But anyway, when they hired Buddy Parker, there were a few rumblings in Pittsburgh from...
Hold on a second. Who's Buddy Parker for the fans out there that are going to delve in? And again, we're talking with Jim Wexell on the clock about his great book about the Steelers draft system, how they put together these great teams. Buddy Parker, who is he? How's he get involved?
Buddy Parker got drunk one day and resigned as the coach of the world champion Detroit Lions.
I quit!
In August.
In August!
And so the Steelers hired him. And there were some astute sports writers in Pittsburgh that says, this guy, you need a GM with the draft. The draft is the way to go. This is the late 50s. And I ran across some of those articles. I'm like, wow, the draft is the way to go. That's something we would say now, right?
Yeah.
Well, even a decade earlier or two. But back in the 50s, they groused it. Buddy Ryan is going to be bad for the draft. You need a GM. You need to get with it. And, of course, Buddy Ryan traded all the draft picks, right? But you asked me how the Chief got the scouting department involved. But after he traded all his draft picks, Dan Rooney acquired power in like 64. And in the preseason of 65, Buddy got drunk again and tried to trade half the team. And Dan Rooney was finally in power and said no. And Buddy Parker said, I resign. And
I quit again.
The Chief always gave him back his job the next day after he sobered up, right? But Dan would not. And they fired him, and they brought in a new guy, Mike Nixon, to be the interim coach. But Dan was the power, and Art, his brother, Art Jr., was trying to become an actor in New York City. And he quit that, and he came back home, and he said, Mom, I want to be in the organization like Danny. And she went to the Chief and said, Artie wants to be a part of the organization. And Chief said, well, Buddy Parker has traded all our draft picks for the next 10 years. So if we put Artie at head of personnel, he can't screw anything up.
Can't be any worse, right?
He can't screw anything up.
Yeah, there's nobody there. Yeah, I love it.
5 years later, the Chief said that was the best move I ever made. Mm-hmm. Artie helped bring in Bill Nunn about 67, 68. And
now, where does Nunn come from? Because I'm always curious about this. And for you Steeler fans who love your Steelers, you know who Bill Nunn is. I mean, he, in essence... he creates the foundation. Where does Nunn come from? Is he a Pittsburgh guy?
Bill Nunn's a Pittsburgh guy.
Okay.
He and his buddies would drive from the Hill District to go watch Cleveland play. because Cleveland signed black players, and he worked for the Courier. He was the sports editor for the Pittsburgh Courier.
One of the greatest black
paper,
African-American papers of all time.
The top African-American paper in the country.
Yeah.
And he produced the Black College All-Star team, which was in Pittsburgh. They would have it down at the Hilton, and the Rooneys helped him.
Really?
Yeah, and so that was in the early 60s. So, in 67, he turned out his All-America team in the Courier. Dan Rooney at the Roosevelt Hotel opened his Courier and looked at the Black College All-Star team and said, why don't I know any of these players? What are my scouts doing? We helped this guy, and I don't know one of these players. He goes down to the lobby to see who the Courier beat guy is. It wasn't Bill Nunn. It never was. And he said to the guy, he said, why doesn't Bill Nunn ever cover this team? And I said, he thinks you're a clown show. And this was 67 when they were a clown show.
And they were a clown show, right?
And so Dan Rooney facilitates a meeting with Bill Nunn. Why don't you cover our team? And Bill said, all these reasons that I just named, clown show, racism,
right.
I have trouble getting in your press box at Forbes Field. So it's just, and plus you guys stink.
Right.
You can't win.
Right.
And Dan Rooney, hire that man. The Steinbrenner to Costanza thing. After Costanza ripped Steinbrenner,
right.
hire that man.
Yeah, right.
So that's what Dan
You want
Rooney
a guy
did.
that's going to tell you like it is.
Bold move. And that's what kind of guy Dan Rooney was.
Yeah.
So now you've got the two Rooney brothers, the two Rooney boys, Dan and Art Jr., now Bill Nunn, and the next step the following year was Chuck Noll.
Wow.
And so those are the pieces behind. Then, Bill Nunn gave the keys to the kingdom with the black college teams and going to the black colleges. Bill Nunn, it explains in there how Bill Nunn was still a part-time editor at a Courier, still putting out that black college All-America team, and half scout with the Steelers.
Wow.
So he would leave guys like L.C. Greenwood off the
Is that
All-America
right?
team.
Okay, I like that. I like that.
And then other teams started looking at who Nunn was leaving off his teams.
Right.
That he think the Steelers would get in the 10th round.
Right.
So then he had to stop doing that, and the Stallworth thing, he just had to steal the tape.
I wouldn't give Art Modell any information if it was me. I like that thinking by Bill Nunn, man.
Well, Bill finally had to stop leaving people off the team because people got wise to that.
Yeah.
Hey, he told Chuck Noll, we can't do that with Stallworth. We just steal the tape.
We got to have integrity.
There was a
here.
Don Hudson tape of John Stallworth, a game he played against Ed Too Tall Jones' team. Tennessee State was the best defense, the defending national black college champ. Ed Too Tall Jones was the number one pick of the 74 draft.
Okay.
The great 74 draft the Steelers just cleaned up. Ed Too Tall Jones was number one. And so a lot of scouts went to see Tennessee State play. What was Alabama A&M? Where'd Stallworth come from? Alabama A&M, I think.
Yeah.
And that was a rival game, and they played it on Thanksgiving.
The Quarter Horse Rancher.
Nunn knew all the coaches, so he was there the night before Thanksgiving, great party night, right? He was there talking to the coaches, and they couldn't stop talking about this guy Stallworth. And Nunn said, well, I'm going to beat her tomorrow. You better throw him the ball. They threw it to him, and they called it the Don Hudson tape. So he reminded someone in the Steeler offices of Don Hudson.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that tape went all around, and Nunn never returned it.
So let's get back into the 74 draft, which we think is so instrumental to, all you fans, the younger fans that are out there, the reason you bleed black and gold, the reason you have your black and gold man and lady caves and you got Steelers tattoos is because football is a lineage. It is a heritage. It's a pride in what, the chief behind us created. And of course, maybe that apex is 1974 with that draft, Jim. You get into it in on the clock, the Jimmy. This is your what, third book?
Fifth.
Jeez, the last one was Palomalo. You got to look at it. Here, right there, go to Jim Wexell. Jim Wexell Books.
JimWexell.com.
JimWexell.com, right there, JimWexell.com. Go right there. You can get On the Clock. You can get the Palomalo book. What are the other books?
Palomalo book is 40% off for Christmas here. It's a great deal, and I'll sign them. Just hit contact us like you did, and I'll sign them. The other books are Steeler Nation. It was a road trip book from
Love that
2007.
book.
A lot of
that
people
book.
really liked that book. Yeah, that was fun.
You were sitting in people's kitchens.
I was.
Talking about the Steelers with the families.
Yeah.
Go to JimWexell.com. Look at all Jimmy's books. He's a great writer.
Thank
Back to 1974.
Well, the key to that whole draft was Stallworth. The Don Hudson tape, Chuck Noll saw that, and he wanted him in the first round. They wanted a receiver, right? And they had to talk him out of it. Chuck, we have the only tape that exists. None hasn't turned it back. We've told him to turn it back, bring it back, but he hasn't. And you can get him. He has a bad 40 time for all the other scouts. We retimed him at a better time. But I go through all the details of all of that, and none was the guy there. And so they talked Chuck Noll into waiting on Stallworth. Take Swan. He's made big plays in big games. He has a better time. He's played at a bigger university, USC. Take Swan. And Dallas was going to take him with the next pick.
You could see that, right?
That's what happens.
Imagine him and Preston Pearson on the same team. My goodness.
So anyway, they convinced Noll, and Noll wasn't real happy. He didn't like this. And so they get to the second round. Chuck, we took a wide receiver in the first. We can't take Stallworth again. And we like his linebacker out of Kent State. And there's some great Lambert stories in there too about him at Kent State.
Is there really?
Yeah.
I have 3 jerseys. Mike Webster, God rest his soul, Jack Lambert, and arguably the greatest defensive player of all time, behind Lawrence Taylor, who's a freak, Troy Polamalu. I've argued that a lot of times. Haven't really gotten blown back from national guys either. You can make an argument Polamalu's the greatest defensive player of all time. I'm just speaking from my heart. Anyway, back to Jack Lambert.
Well, I'm not going to I'm giving away
Don't
a
give
lot
all
of
the
other stories,
secrets away.
The Lambert stuff's too precious.
Is it?
Yeah, it's worth buying the book over.
I love it.
So anyway, they take Lambert. It was down to him and another linebacker, but it was
Who was the other linebacker?
The research is confirmed.
Larry Fitzdougall played a half a season for the Cardinals.
There's a guy that made it. But there was also talk of another linebacker in some other research, so I left that guy's name out.
Yeah.
It's never been clear. So anyway, it's third round. They don't have a pick, so they got to wait to the fourth round for Stallworth. And Noll, man, he kept telling everybody, "You blew it. I know you blew it. There's no way we're going to get this guy." San Diego picking a wide receiver. They had a guy named Fouts, a young quarterback named Fouts, that they wanted to give some receivers to.
Yeah, right.
And so they took the wrong receiver, and Steelers took Stallworth. So now we're into the fourth round, and Noll wanted Webster. They all love Webster. There was a Senior Bowl tape, Webster going against the Tennessee State middle linebacker. I told you about Tennessee State with Ed Too Tall Jones.
Right.
But they had a great middle linebacker too, and the Bears loved him, and Webster beat the crap out of him in the Senior Bowl. And the Steelers were attuned to him because they had some, George Perlis had some connections at Wisconsin because he was a Big Ten guy. And so there were some connections, and Woodenhofer was a Missouri guy. And, the Penn State guy, the linebacker U guy, Radakovich, Bad Rad.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Radakovich had coached at Colorado against Webster the year before, loved Webster, and he was back with the Steelers.
Boy, was he right.
They loved Webster, but he was 6'1", like 230.
Maybe 6'1".
Right.
Maybe 6'1".
The exact weight
with cleats on.
is in there.
With cleats on.
But he just beat the crap out of this guy from the Tennessee State in the Senior Bowl, and the Bears took that guy with the 4th overall pick.
Wow.
And after the Steelers took Webster in the 5th round, somebody said, I don't know what the Bears were watching at the Senior Bowl, but this Webster, we feel we got to steal.
So what happened to that draft class? They do any good, Jim?
A little bit. And then they got a guy named Donnie Shell way later, like 3 days later.
Freight train.